The New Year's Eve Stalker, a terrifying encounter on a lonely road. A night that still haunts me. I want to start by saying that I'm not someone who jumps at shadows. I don't scare easily, and I certainly don't believe in ghosts. I've never had an overactive imagination, and I don't drink or do anything that could make me see things that aren't real. What I experienced last New Year's Eve wasn't a trick of the mind, a prank, or a mere coincidence. It was real. And to this day, I have no rational explanation for it. My name is Ethan Cole, and I was 25 years old when this happened. I lived in a quiet Midwestern town, one of those places where everyone knows each other and nothing ever seems to happen. My best friend, Ryan Parker, came from a wealthy family, and every year his parents hosted a massive New Year's Eve party at their estate. It was the kind of event everyone looked forward to: great food, drinks, music, and a chance to reconnect with old friends before the year ended. I had been attending these parties since high school, and this year was no different. What was different, though, was the drive. Ryan's house was in one of the more secluded parts of town, a place you could only reach by winding back roads lined with thick, looming trees, the kind of road where the darkness swallows your headlights, and the only sound is your tires on the cracked asphalt. There were no houses, no streetlights, just miles of empty road, save for a single, dilapidated shack that had been abandoned for years. Every time I passed it, I wondered who had lived there, why they had left, and why it still stood there, forgotten, decaying, alone. That night, as I made my way to the party, the air had a bone-chilling crispness. Winter had finally settled in after an unusually warm December, and the first real cold front had arrived. As I turned onto the deserted back road, I switched on my high beams. Something I rarely did, since I hated blinding other drivers. But there was no one else on the road, just me. And then I saw her, a lone figure standing completely still at the edge of the road. The woman in white. At first I thought it was an illusion, a trick of the light, but as I got closer, my stomach twisted into a tight knot. It was a woman, standing motionless, just at the edge of the tree line, her body rigid and unnatural. She wore a long, white gown, something that looked out of place, like a dress from a different era. It was thin, tattered, dirty, as though she had been wandering through the woods for days. She didn't move. She didn't react to my headlights blinding her face. Her head was slightly tilted down, her hair falling over her face, obscuring her features. But there was something wrong about her posture, something unnerving about the way she stood there, like a mannequin propped up by invisible strings. I drove past her slowly, my fingers gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. I expected her to wave for help or stumble forward, but she did neither. She just turned her head to watch me as I passed. Not her body, just her head. I caught a glimpse of her face in the rearview mirror. Her eyes were hollow, dark pits that seemed far too deep, like they had been carved into her skull. And she was smiling. A slow, unnatural grin that stretched her lips too wide, exposing something dark inside. My stomach dropped. I pressed down on the gas. I told myself I was just tired, that maybe she was just a lost traveler, someone in need of help. But deep down, I knew. I should have never looked back. The nightmare begins. I arrived at the Parker estate, pushing the eerie encounter to the back of my mind. The party was already in full swing when I walked in. Laughter, music, the pop of champagne bottles. Warm, golden light flooded the rooms, a stark contrast to the cold darkness outside. I greeted old friends, grabbed a drink, and tried to shake the feeling that something was still watching me. As the night went on, I almost convinced myself it had been nothing, until I left. By then, most guests had gone. The house was quiet, and my car was the only one left in the driveway. As I climbed into the driver's seat and started the engine, a warning light flashed on my dashboard. Low tire pressure. Not unusual, I told myself. Cold weather does that. I pulled onto the same empty road, the one that led past the spot where I had seen her. The trees loomed higher, their leafless branches twisting into the sky like skeletal fingers. My headlights barely cut through the dense, suffocating darkness. And then, my car lurched forward, a loud grinding noise screaming from beneath me. The tires. I slammed the brakes and stepped out, my breath turning to mist in the freezing air. My phone flashlight flickered as I bent down to inspect the damage. All 4 of my tires were shredded. Not slashed, torn, like something with claws had raked through them. I stood there, paralyzed. Then, the wind stopped. The entire forest fell silent. And then, I heard it. A whisper. "I see you." I froze. It wasn't loud. It was soft, close. Right behind me. I turned my flashlight toward the tree line. She was standing there, closer than before. Only a few feet away. Her white gown was even dirtier now, stained with dark patches. Her hair still hung over her face, but this time, her mouth was wide open, a black, gaping void. "Can you see me?" she whispered. I ran. I don't remember how I made it back. I don't remember the branches slapping my face as I ran through the woods, or the way my chest burned with exhaustion. All I remember is the feeling of her watching me, her whisper following me through the trees. I reached Ryan's house, pounding on the door until his mother let me in. I must have looked insane because they didn't question me. They just let me stay the night. But the nightmare wasn't over. She followed me. I woke up in the guest bedroom, heart pounding. It was 3:14 a.m., and someone was knocking on the window. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. The knocks were soft, deliberate. Then came the whisper. "I see you." I squeezed my eyes shut. "Let me in." I stayed there, paralyzed, until the sun came up. By morning, she was gone. The police found my car where I had abandoned it, but there was no sign of the woman. They checked the abandoned shack nearby, but no one had lived there for years. But they did find something. Scattered around the area were shredded clothing, old bones, and rusted knives. She was never found. But sometimes, on cold, winter nights, when the wind stops blowing and the world goes silent, I still hear her whisper, "I see you." The taxi ride from hell, a night I barely survived. A ride I will never forget. There are moments in life that change you forever. Moments where the thin line between safety and horror disappears, leaving you face to face with a nightmare you never saw coming. This is one of those moments. I've always considered myself a rational person. I don't jump at shadows, and I've never been the kind to let fear take over my mind. But after that night, I can no longer pretend that the world is a safe place. Because I know now, monsters exist. And sometimes, they don't come with fangs or claws. Sometimes, they wear a smile. The late night flight? My name is Claire Matthews, and I was 27 years old when this happened. I had just returned from a short business trip to Chicago, taking a late night flight back home to Seattle. My plane landed at midnight, and by the time I had made my way to baggage claim and out to the taxi pickup area, it was close to 12:30 a.m. I could have called an Uber, but the app kept glitching. I didn't want to wait around alone, especially at this hour. So I did something I rarely do. I hailed a random taxi from the line outside the airport. It was an older yellow cab, slightly dented, with a driver who looked to be in his mid-40s. Short, stocky, with graying hair and deep-set eyes. He gave me a too-friendly smile as he rolled down the window. "Where you headed?" he asked. I hesitated, then gave him my apartment address. He nodded. $30. Cash. It was cheaper than Uber, and something about the way he said it felt normal enough. So, I got in. And that was my first mistake. Something was off. The moment we pulled onto the highway, I knew something was wrong. At first, it was just the way he kept glancing at me in the rearview mirror. His eyes would linger too long, like he was studying me. Twice, I caught his gaze, and both times he smiled. A slow, unsettling grin that made my stomach twist. Then, he started talking. "So what's a pretty girl like you doing traveling alone this late?" I forced a laugh. "Just coming back from work," he hummed, nodding. "Bet your boyfriend must be worried about you." The way he said it made my skin crawl. I lied. "Yeah, he's expecting me." The driver tilted his head, like he was thinking about something. Then he asked, "What's his name?" I froze. That was not a normal question. I felt a sudden rush of unease, but I forced myself to stay calm. "Jason," I lied again. "He's waiting for me at home." The driver just smiled again, but this time, there was something off about it. Like he knew I was lying. A wrong turn. We had been driving for 15 minutes when I realized something wasn't right. My apartment was only 30 minutes from the airport and I knew the route by heart, but when I saw my exit coming up, the driver didn't slow down. I leaned forward. That was my exit. He didn't respond. I felt my pulse spike. "Hey," I said, louder. "You missed my exit." The driver let out a small chuckle, but he didn't look at me. "Relax, sweetheart. I know a shortcut." Every hair on my body stood up. "No," I said firmly. "Take the next exit." The driver sighed, his fingers tapping the wheel. Then, finally, he flicked on his blinker and took the next off-ramp. For a brief second, I felt relief, until I realized this wasn't a real exit. It was a service road leading into a dark, empty industrial area. The streetlights were dim, casting eerie shadows over silent warehouses and abandoned lots. There were no cars, no houses, no people. Just me and him. And that's when I knew I wasn't going home. The escape plan. My heart pounded in my chest, my breath coming in short, sharp gasps. I knew I had to act fast. I reached for my phone, trying to text someone, anyone, but before I could even unlock it, the driver spoke. "You don't need that," he said. I froze. Slowly, I looked up. In the rearview mirror, his eyes were locked onto me, dark and knowing. I felt a cold wave of terror wash over me. This wasn't random. This wasn't a misunderstanding. He planned this, the split-second decision. I had two choices: stay in the car and hope he wasn't taking me somewhere worse. Run. I chose the second option. As we slowed down at a red light, I saw my chance. I grabbed my bag, threw the door open, and jumped out. The driver shouted, his voice angry, demanding. But I was already running, sprinting toward the only light source I could see. A police car. It was parked in an empty gas station lot, its headlights off, the officer inside, half asleep. I didn't care. I ran straight toward it, waving my arms and screaming. The officer looked up just in time to see me, and the taxi driver peeling off into the darkness. Aftermath. I told the officer everything. The weird questions, the wrong turn, the eerie way he kept staring at me. He offered to drive me home, and I gladly accepted. By the time I walked into my apartment, I felt like I was going to be sick. My hands were shaking, my body was exhausted, but I was safe. Or so I thought, because that night, at exactly 3:14 a.m., someone knocked on my door. The final horror. At first, I thought I imagined it. But then, another knock. Soft, slow, deliberate. I grabbed my phone, my fingers trembling as I texted my neighbor, George. "Are you at my door?" A few seconds later, he replied, "No." The knocking continued. I crept toward the peephole, my stomach twisted in knots. Slowly, I peeked through, and my blood ran cold. Standing on the other side of the door, bathed in the dim hallway light, was the taxi driver. He found me. I staggered back, my breath caught in my throat. Then, from the other side of the door, his voice. "I wasn't going to hurt you." I bolted for my bedroom, locking the door, grabbing the taser I kept by my nightstand. My phone shook in my hands as I dialed 911. But by the time the police arrived, he was gone. Lessons learned. The next day I installed cameras, I changed my locks. I never took random taxis again. And every now and then, when I walk home late at night, I feel like I'm being watched. Like he's still out there, waiting. And one day he'll knock again. Stay vigilant, lessons from real-life nightmares. The terrifying events in the New Year's Eve Stalker and the taxi ride from hell remind us that danger often hides in plain sight. These weren't supernatural encounters, they were real-life threats that could happen to anyone. The most important lesson? Always trust your instincts. If something feels off, don't ignore it. Whether it's a lone figure on a dark road or a driver who asks too many personal questions, your gut reaction is your first line of defense. Awareness and quick thinking can save lives. Always have an escape plan, share your location with trusted contacts, and never hesitate to act when you sense danger. Predators count on hesitation. Don't give them that chance. If you ever feel unsafe, leave immediately, seek help, or call the authorities. At Johan, we bring you real stories of fear and survival, not just to scare you but to prepare you, because the scariest thing of all, not being ready when the moment comes. Subscribe to Johan Horror for more chilling true stories. And remember, staying alert could save your life.